President Biden will enter his second year in office after the new year, but he faces a big test. Can he and Democrats hold on to their power? The 2022 midterm elections are expected to be tough for Democrats, according to an average of polls by 538. Mr. Biden's approval rating has dropped to the low 40s. COVID continues to be an issue for this president. The Omicron variant is driving coronavirus cases to the highest levels on record, more than 300,000 cases per day on average in the U.S. And then there's the issue of the Democrats' failure to get the president's social spending bill passed. Couple that with the infighting between the more liberal and moderate factions of the party, and it may be difficult to try to sway voters. All the while, Republicans in the Senate are withholding their votes of support entirely. Now, all of this could spell trouble for President Biden. And so for more on this, I want to bring in Leslie Sanchez and Joel Payne. Leslie is a CBS News political contributor and Republican strategist, and Joel is a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. So I want to begin with a question for the both of you. The Senate is split 50-50. Democrats in the House have a very slim majority. We're talking about less than 10 representatives. Can Democrats hold on to their razor-thin majority? Leslie, we know that some crucial seats are up for grabs in the Senate, particularly in Pennsylvania and Georgia. What do you think?
I think Republicans are increasingly optimistic about what this campaign situation looks like. Look, there's a lot of reasons we've heard about just in the last few segments. The increase in COVID, when people thought there'd be more assurances and more stability. You saw the highest pandemic record that happened in the last year happen this week. You see an uptick in inflation. And more importantly, you see a redistricting map that positively favors Republican seats and also a lot of new opportunities for Republicans. So the Democrats are certainly on their heels, and Republicans are going to seize every opportunity in every one of those districts.
And Joel, what about you? Are you optimistic the Democrats can maintain their position here in D.C.?
Oh, Skylar, I'm a Democrat, which means that I am congressionally bound to be pessimistic. I think Leslie's analysis is right. I guess what I'd add to it is that, look, the winds of history don't favor Democrats, and it doesn't favor any incumbent party. If you look over the last 25 plus years, there's only one incumbent party in the midterm that's held on to their majority. That's in 2002, and that was in a very unique circumstance right after 9/11. So I think most political parties who are the incumbent party understand you have a short window to do the things that you want to do to push forward your agenda. I think that's why the president and Democrats have been pretty aggressive here in 2021. I think what they need to do is stick the landing on the president's Build Back Better agenda and get to the business of actually selling it. A decade ago, when I worked in Harry Reid's Senate Majority Leader office and when Barack Obama was the president, what really tripped us up wasn't the fact that the Affordable Care Act was unpopular. It was that the process to get there to the finish line was unpopular. People don't like seeing how the sausage is made. People do not like seeing how legislation is made and meted out. And so I think if Democrats can turn the page from the legislative making process to the actual process of implementing, I think they have a better chance than they do right now.
And so on that note, in terms of Build Back Better, obviously that didn't get passed this year. What does that look like if Democrats lose control in 2022?
Well, Skylar, it looks smaller. Let's talk about where we are right now, and then we'll go to 2022. I think under any circumstance, it's going to be a smaller bill in size and scope. I think just in terms of what the president and what Democrats can look forward to in 2022, if they are not in the majority. Look, that was the scenario that most Democrats were kind of thinking that they were going to be dealing with before the results of the Georgia runoff earlier in 2021. If you remember, it was very likely Mitch McConnell was going to be the Senate Majority Leader. And I think President Biden was girding for, how do I manage a divided government? I think Democrats are going to be faced with that scenario again, potentially. In some cases, that might actually, I don't want to say favor Joe Biden, but that's an easier governing scenario than managing a majority with a 50-50 split.
And so, Leslie, what I'm paying attention to is what Republicans will run on in 2022. Obviously, we've talked about those seats up for grabs. What are some of the big issues that you think that they'll use to their advantage?
Overall, I thought Joel was exactly right when he's saying that it's going to be a much smaller bill, BBB. I think Republicans are already looking at the headwinds and looking at a very unfavorable president. And not only in the COVID response, so you will hear an uptick about that, especially when there was this massive call for vaccinations, but very little heard about testing. They're going to talk about leadership on that front, but add to that border security. The immigration issue will come up. There will be something called a Parents' Bill of Rights, talking about not nationalizing this federal education, but continuing to empower the states on education. We saw how that had an impact just on a gubernatorial race in Virginia. And certainly economic issues, dealing with inflation, not saying it's transitory, but trying to support small business. That's what Republicans are saying. And I want to add just one part. We look at the historical difference, but 1994, when Republicans took over for the first time in 40 years, it was Contract with America. It was a pledge to Americans. When you move forward to 2010, which was the biggest pummeling of Democrats in 70 years, that was a lot of the Tea Party reaction, pushback, and a populism that was really looking at unfavorable reaction to President Obama at the time. I think you're seeing that same kind of uptick wave in this divided government, but this populist response, and they want action, and they're going to continue to be fickle and move back and forth until they find.
All right, so I have one more question for the both of you. Will supporting former President Trump be a factor for Republicans who were up for re-election? And how did that support for Mr. Trump impact the gubernatorial races that we saw this past year? Joe, let's start with you.
Well, so this is a great question, Skylar, because I actually think it belies a bigger point, which is that neither party is united. The people who run the Republican Party are Mitch McConnell or Kevin McCarthy. I don't think they're Trumpers. Even Kevin McCarthy, and that might upset some of my Democratic friends, but they're not Trumpers. They are people who want to be in power, and they actually they have an agenda that they want to push forward. The Trumpers have kind of a beef that they want to avenge what they think happened in the 2020 election, and I don't get the sense that that the Republican Party is united along those lines. They're united in that they want to hold power and they want to beat Joe Biden, but they're not united, just like the Democrats aren't united. I'm so interested in what's going on up in Alaska. If you look at that governor's race that the president weighed in on, or President Trump rather weighed in on, and said, my support for you is conditional if you don't support Lisa Murkowski because she was a thorn in my side when I was the president. Those are the types of things that Republicans are going to have to deal with in an era of Donald Trump and Republican establishment split rule.
And Leslie, how about you?
People can underestimate, or shouldn't underestimate, the tremendous popularity the president continues to maintain, especially in states like Texas, especially along the Southwest. So I say follow the money. He's still significant in raising money. He has an impact in primary candidates and how those debates are happening on the party level. But as you uptick to a national level, the sentiment is different. 2 years into the pandemic, looking at solutions, increasingly voters are looking at rock solid solutions coming from governors, where traditionally Republicans like to be. So there's a split there that will continue to grow. I don't think that you can say that the former president's irrelevant, and that would be foolhardy to say that. But his impact is going to shift and change. And I think his megaphone will activate the base, but have less impact in maybe some of the more critical areas that Republicans are looking at on the map.
Gotcha. All right, Leslie Sanchez, Joel Payne, we appreciate it. Thank you.